Welcome Our Revolution NOLA membership. My name is David Alvarez. Like you, I have been going to forums, reading, trying to understand the candidates. Today we are bringing you video responses to questions of each candidate, Desiree Charbonnet and Latoya Cantrell, with the hopes that it will help you in determining who you feel is going to be the best for the future of our city. Please review these videos, share these videos, and we hope that they help you in your decision on November 18th when you go and vote. Thank you so much. The first question is about patronage in our local government. The mayor has considerable influence over how we are governed through the power of appointment to the multiple boards and commissions that govern much of our city's work. What process will you follow in selecting your appointees to the multiple commissions and boards in our city?
I will make sure that there's fair representation of the community. Like it should reflect who the community is. But I think in instances when it's like sewer and water board, I think there ought to be licensed professional engineers on the board, since it's such a serious topic and such a serious issue for us right now. After August 5th, so much was shown to us that what was lacking there. These individuals would not be able to contract or do any business with the city or profit in any way. So that would eliminate that question or that issue. But generally, I think equity is important. I think professionals in the field, depending on what the board or commission is, they should be on there. I think you always, always, always have to have just members of the general public that are lay people that are there to represent the interests of the everyday man.
Okay. Well, with respect to that response, would you pledge to convene third-party advisory boards that are comprised of relevant professionals, like you described, and concerned citizens that review and make appointment recommendations to you?
Well, I would not mind doing that. Yes, I would.
Okay.
I would.
Thank you. So the next topic would be the economy.
Okay.
So the next question. Understanding that law provides the city with 35% DBE business enterprise participation targets, how do you ensure that more city dollars go to smaller operators and locals, and specifically ensure that the city meets and enforces its targets for DBE participation in city contracts?
Enforcement is the key where this is concerned. I've heard a lot of complaints about DBE and minority-owned businesses that say that they just have not felt that they received meaningful participation. So we're going to have to review this every so often to see the status of where they are. They should be able to tell the mayor that, Miss Mayor, Madam Mayor, I did receive this contract, but this is really the only amount of work I'm doing. Also, the whole concept behind getting DBE participation is that when you're the 35% interest or you're one of that group, you are supposed to be working with the prime contractor. You're supposed to be learning from the prime contractor so that you can eventually become a prime contractor. So we've got to have the checks and balances there that I can ensure that that's happening. And so one of the issues I've heard is that when some DBEs call, they don't really get a response. So I have pledged to do this, appoint an ethics compliance officer where it concerns the letting of contracts and reviewing the DBE participation so that somebody's eye is constantly on it. I just want to add to that individual will also be there for employees of City Hall because, as an employee, you can certainly be faced with an ethical dilemma in terms of what to do for a particular customer or citizen. It can happen. You could refer to that person and find out, what's the best way to handle the situation so that, you don't violate any ethics laws. But I'm looking forward to that because that'll be a new position that's never been there. And it can really keep everybody, I'll say, honest.
Okay. And very interesting.
Excuse me.
So,
I'm so sorry.
no. So following that response, do you pledge, or you're willing to pledge to set a goal of doubling the number of contractors that actually reach the target of 35% DBE participation?
Tell me exactly what that means.
So within the current contracting structure, if somebody gets prime or somebody receives a contract, there's a target that 35% of the subcontracting or of the work is going to be DBE or designated DBE, but oftentimes they fall very short of that goal. Sometimes
and it's not 35%.
Sometimes it's not even close. So are you willing
No.
to pledge to commit to setting goals to at least try to get to 35, maybe incentivizing whatnot? Is that something that you're willing to?
Yeah, and I don't even know if we have to incentivize it, right? It's built into the law for contracting with the city, so we should just be doing it. I have some thoughts on that. It escaped me for a minute, but I will tell you. The DBEs are they you got it's part of, what am I trying to say? Economic development. All right. So when it's proven that disadvantaged business enterprises, minority-owned businesses tend to hire consistently minorities, right? So you're bringing in those who feel the most left out by making sure that they get that 35% piece of the pie. So, it's in everybody's best interest. I go back to my days on the bench at municipal court. The people that came before me, they had two things in common. They lacked a firm educational foundation. They lacked a vision for their future. They saw no opportunity on the horizon. We've got to be able to give people that. And the majority of them were African American and poor.
Okay, thank you. Next topic would be our budget. From a critical thinking perspective, the city's budget represents the priorities and values of our city. We currently spend around 3% of our municipal budget on families, while spending over 60% on enforcement and security. How will you lead the city departments to craft a budget that prioritizes families?
Certainly that budget needs to be increased. No question about it, 3%. And we know that families are struggling. I would craft the budget by looking at new money. I don't want to tax the citizens anymore. The citizens have told me that they're not going to pay another tax until they start seeing some results. Again, going back to my experience at municipal court, it was poor families that found themselves, poor people who found themselves in court day in and day out. They don't have a lot of supportive services. That budget should be increased. When I say I don't want to raise taxes, that means that I'm going to look at new money. There's new money on the horizon. First of all, we have some bonds that we will be paying off shortly. That's going to free up about $20 million in a year. Then we have new developments that's going to be taking place. We have the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center is going to generate a lease payment to the city. You're going to generate sales tax and property tax just from there. Above the hotel, I'm referring to the Four Seasons, and then above that, it's going to be condos. So then you're going to have property taxes for each separate parcel of property, and so that's going to generate money as well. So I am trying with all my might not to increase anything that people are paying. Until people start seeing results, I don't think they should be paying anything else. But it's critical. I know that we need to increase that budget. I have every intention on trying to place the money on the front end of crime prevention as opposed to having to have 60% of the budget on cost of criminal justice.
On the back end.
Yes.
Okay, understandable. Along with that, with that response, would you be willing to pledge to increase family share of our budget to 10%?
Ooh, I would pledge to increase it, but it would be disingenuous of me to say 10% right now without knowing what kind of budget I'd be facing. I recognize the need. I know it's serious and it's dire, but to say 10 would be saying that in the blind.
Yes, understandable.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so next topic would be housing.
I knew that was going to be a topic.
Yes, the city is currently undergoing a massive escalation in housing prices and rents, thus pushing accessible housing out of the range of an ever-increasing percentage of our working residents. Data show that short-term rentals exacerbate this problem. How will you govern our current short-term rental market?
I have released a comprehensive housing plan that addresses that really thoroughly, but for purposes of this interview, one of the first things I've talked about is making sure that it's managed in a way that it works for the neighborhoods it's in. I recognize that it's caused a problem for many, but in primarily zoned residential areas, I think it should be more restrictive. I've heard families and parents talk about how, they really are uncomfortable with not knowing who is in the house next door weekend after weekend, and they want their kids to play outside. They don't want to have to be worried about which weirdo is there every other weekend or whatever. So the idea is to preserve those neighborhoods. There's some where it's much more mixed use. a little more commercial, and maybe we can have a little more leeway. But what my plan says is that limiting it to one per neighborhood. I've gone further to say that, maybe we ought to consider that person whether they're a resident here or not, because a lot of people, as we know, from out of town, they buy the property, they're never here. They're not checking on it. They don't have that vested interest like we would as residents of New Orleans. So that's another idea. But just limiting it to accommodate families and culture as well. We talk about our culture bearers and affordable housing for musicians, right? And so that's another issue. But Treme, where my family's from and rooted for 200 years, used to be our natural musicians village. And now we've got to find musicians neighborhoods. That's just, for lack of a real professional term, twisted.
Understandable. Following that response, will you pledge to possibly...
How many pledges are there in this interview? You know what? You guys need to give me some info on the front end.
Were we willing to pledge to cap STR saturation or establish saturation guidelines within the neighborhoods you described?
I would establish saturation guidelines, yes.
Thank you. Another question regarding housing. The city currently holds a large portfolio of underused or vacant lots, which are largely inaccessible to city residents. How will you use the city's significant stock of land to increase affordability in our city?
We need to move those properties through the city process, through the blight remediation process as well, because not only there's lots of lots with blighted property or vacant properties on them. So incentives to people who buy them and rent them for a reasonable rate, or even a rate that accommodates low to moderate income families. That's huge. People should be able to live in the city where they work. And so I'd start with that. If the city's serious about it, we'll have to do something. And I think that's a good way to start. We have 60% renters. We're talking about affordable housing, and generally that is in terms of renting. I think we need to change that. At least look at aiming at flipping that to 60% owners. And again, encouraging people to buy the blighted properties or to give them to someone. If they're sitting blighted, why not just give them with the condition that you get this soft second mortgage and you do have to remain in the property. There's got to be some commitment on both ends, right? So for a certain amount of years. And I think that would help as well.
In line with that,
will you pledge to?
Yes, there's a mechanism. Will you pledge to utilize mechanisms similar to what you described, such as land trusts and title covenants that ensure affordability of these properties, these publicly owned properties?
Yes.
Okay. Next question. Currently, and this is about privatization, private companies are being contracted to perform duties that would otherwise be performed by city employees. Many people consider this to be a backdoor to the privatizing of our public works. Will you pledge to immediately curtail this practice?
I have no intention of privatizing the Department of Public Works or the Sewage and Water Board. There was a time when people wanted to work for the city or government because it was a good job, right? And you had civil service protection, and you got benefits. You get vacation days, you get sick days, you get health care. We've got to keep that in place. We can't do away with it completely. We've privatized enough, in my opinion. But for those public works departments and drainage and water and management, I don't see going. I can tell you right now, it is not my intention to privatize.
Okay.
And then sometimes privatization costs more for the consumer.
Well, the next question was about Sewage and Water Board, and so obviously you don't want to privatize that.
Now, let me just say this, though. They need to work together better. It has traditionally been a problem between DPW and Sewage and Water Board not working together. First 90 days, when I get in, they're going to give me a report and lay out how they're going to work together. They work on essentially, they use the same public right-of-way, so they ought to be working together. And they ought to be combining their resources and whatever assets they have to get jobs done. So they're going to have to do that.
Okay, wonderful. Next question would be about public works and jobs programs. The city currently spends a significant portion of its regular infrastructure maintenance budget on an ad hoc and expensive emergency repairs, largely forestalling relatively cheap preventative maintenance. Understanding that infrastructure projects are among the best ratio of economic stimulus effect per government dollar spent, how would you take leadership on enacting a public works projects of substantial size to stabilize and improve the surface infrastructure of our city?
I am so glad you asked that, because it's something that we can make a significant dent in, because there's so much money there allocated for this. $2.4 billion in the capital projects budget for this. My issue is this: there's not enough people at City Hall to handle these big jobs. People need to start seeing results like right away, at least the work to begin. The budget had DPW was budgeted to spend like $400 million in 2017. They have yet to scratch the surface. I don't think there's enough professionals in that department, not enough employees. So what I'm going to do is institute the use of program managers. These are professionals from big engineering firms that can just come in, and I don't mean privatize, but they are going to guide that project for us to make it work, to make it go. Lay out where we're going to start with the streets. Obviously, again, it's got to be equity. We've got to fix everybody's streets, so we got to make sure we're doing it equitably. But these kinds of companies, not only do they know how to get big projects going, but because it's a FEMA reimbursement, they have great experience applying with the GOSEP funds so that they can be the city can be reimbursed in a very quick manner. They know the forms, they know everything, how to work this out, and it's quick and it's efficient, and FEMA pays their fees. So why not? So sorry, I'm trying to get over this cold.
Sure. Well, you made mention of the bonds. The next question refers to that. There are municipal bonds, as you described, that are currently about to mature. The city has a relatively high bond rating, and national interest rates make capital exceptionally cheap right now. Will you propose a major bond issue to fund a comprehensive street construction plan designed to stabilize our water table and stop our city from sinking?
I would consider it. When you think about having extra money, right? It gets exciting, because in my personal budget, when I realize I've got a little extra this month, I'm like, what do I do, right?
Yeah,
It's like I could do this, I could do that. But as much as I want to say yes, I have a passion to increase early childhood learning centers really, really seriously, offering youth more opportunity. So if I could spend some of that money on some of the things that I think matter in terms of the core issues we're facing, crime prevention for our children, their success in life, just that solid foundation of education and how far that takes them. I'd have to balance it. So maybe there's a way I could maybe do a little bit of both of those. But I can't be more clear about the fact that at this point in life, it almost seems as though your future or your success in life sometimes only has to do with who brought you home from the hospital. So that shouldn't be. Every child, no matter to whom they are born, should have an opportunity at a solid, firm educational foundation. And I think if the city or myself as the mayor insist on that, I need to put some money up as well for that. So I'm a little conflicted. I know the streets need to be fixed, but I do think this, and I'll wrap up this portion with this. If we get to work and we use this money, and we use it wisely, then there is a chance that we can say, look at what we did with the money you gave us, federal government. We need more. You leverage the work you did. You show that you can get this done quickly, efficiently, at a good price, and then maybe there's a chance. For all, he is not our president. One thing he's talked about is wanting to improve infrastructure. So maybe there's a chance for us to benefit somehow from this man.
All right. The next questions are yes and no questions. These are the toughest. Do you support the continued removal of remaining monuments to white supremacy?
The continued removal of if it's a monument to white supremacy, yes.
Okay. Would you support Take 'em Down NOLA's Phase 2 slate in renaming over 200 public places that are currently named after slaveholders?
I would do that. only over time. I do believe this. I think we've made headway. I am an African American woman. I want you to be clear. When my daddy first went to vote, the white man on the other side of the desk told him the only way you're going to vote is if you pay me $1 for this pencil. Now, he could have had pride and walked away, but he did not. He paid that man $1 to exercise his right to vote because that's how much it meant to him. So I don't want anybody watching this to be confused about where I stand. But we've done a lot. It's caused some division. I'd like to try to reunite us before we move further on these issues. I'd like to deal with it in a better manner than it was dealt with. I would like to make sure that we have a good, healthy conversation, because one thing that has happened is we've taken down these monuments, but there's been no discussion about how we're going to what we're going to replace them with, if anything. So I would pause on that right now, and that's my plain answer.
Fair enough. Last one. Will you commit to maintaining New Orleans' welcoming city policy?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Sí, claro que sí.
Oh, okay, bueno, okay, bueno. Well, now is your opportunity to speak to our membership. So, the floor is yours.
Okay, how much time do I have?
As much time as
Okay,
you need.
this is what I would say to the membership. I want you to look at my record. I want you to see what Desiree Charbonnet has done as a public official. I have been in office for over 20 years now, 10 years as the recorder of mortgages, but my best work was in municipal court as a judge, where I created diversion programs, the first of its kind in municipal court, where individuals who were suffering from mental illness and drug addiction and human trafficking and prostitution were released without having to pay bond to participate in programs that addressed their needs. At the end of the program, their charges were dismissed. They paid not 1 cent to participate. I have been on the forefront of criminal justice reform well before this became popular in these parts. I commit to you to have a transparent, accountable administration that's going to serve all of New Orleans, and those who have been left behind will be a priority, because we've got to start lifting up the bottom. But when we lift up the bottom, everybody rises. So that is my commitment to this community. Again, I am not saying I won't serve the entire community, but there are certain portions of this community that have expressed feeling left out. So I'm asking you for your vote, your endorsement, and I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Absolutely. My pleasure.